Everyone, I'm Saltanat and I'm the moderator for today's webinar. A very warm welcome to all of you. We are truly overwhelmed with the response that we have received because in terms of the registrations, we've had around 1,700 registrations. And initially when we started out, basically looking at school children. But we've had college students saying that they would want to join in. So as of now, we have like a 70-30 distribution where we have around 70% of the participants are schools and the remaining 30% is the colleges. Also, the participants for today's program come from all the states across the country. We have a major share from Karnataka, but we also have participants from Goa, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, New Delhi, Odisha, Maharashtra, Telangana, Karnataka. So basically the point I'm trying to make is that we have a very diverse audience. So we will be starting on a very diverse note. So once again, welcome all of you. The webinar is for 1 hour. It is packed with a lot of speakers, and in order to maximize the benefits of this for all of us, we have some rules. And I would request all of you to adhere to these rules so that it will help us. So to ensure better connectivity and clarity, during the webinar, the video and audio of all the participants on the Zoom platform has been disabled. Hence, if you're unable to hear us or need something to be repeated, please put this down in the chat section on the Zoom platform or on the comment section in the YouTube medium which you are on. Here I have two of my colleagues, Taru Mehta and Shabana Kazi, who will be helping me out. So please be assured that, we will be addressing all of you. The other thing is that please type in your questions in the Q&A for the panelist on the Zoom platform. And once you type in the questions, the panelists in the course of the sessions will respond to you. So that we don't wait for all the answers to be responded during the Q&A. The other thing is that when you add your questions, please add your name and the institution that you belong to. Please be mindful of the questions that you put in terms of the language especially. And we would be seeking your feedback in a feedback form, which we will circulate to you at the end of the, which we will circulate to you through your registered email ID. So we would request you to please respond, as that will enable us to dovetail and customize our programs, keeping in mind your requirements. So, so without any further ado, let's move forward. And many of you who have joined in would be familiar with the organization that is TERI. But I just like to quickly introduce TERI as well. So TERI is the acronym and stands for the Energy and Resources Institute. It was established in 1974, and over the years, the institute has grown and expanded to conduct research covering almost every aspect of environment and sustainable development. With a staff strength of around 1,000 employees drawn from diverse backgrounds and organizations, it's able to devise innovative solutions for a sustainable future. TERI is made up of different verticals, and these verticals work on different thematic areas, as well as collaborate to find holistic solutions to the prevailing environmental problems. Today's program is organized by the Environment Education area within TERI, whose mandate is to work with the youth in spreading awareness on various environmental issues and enable them to find solutions to bring about a change at an individual level and to scale it up to the family, to the community, school levels. So that's basically embodying Gandhiji's, saying of "Be the change." Am I audible? Is it clear? I would now, thank you. I've been looking at the responses also. Yeah. So now I'd like to invite our director, Mr. Narasimha Raju, who's in charge of the Southern Regional Center of TERI, which is located in Bangalore. He has held senior position in the government of India and government of Karnataka for around 32 years and has worked extensively on policy formulation and implementation in several important sectors such as revenue, industry, e-governance, urban governance, labor, finance. He has been with TERI since 2018 as a regional director. So I would hand it over to him for the formal welcome and setting the tone for this webinar. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Saltanat, and good afternoon, everybody. At the outset, I would like to extend a warm welcome to our distinguished panelists, participants, my colleagues, and the bright students from different schools and colleges who have logged into this webinar. Normally, this kind of an event we would have held it at our premises here in TERI. But because of the present circumstances warranting social distancing and wearing masks and movement restrictions that are there, we had to hold this through webinar. Nevertheless, this communication through webinar is also a good exercise because more people will be able to participate in this. As Saltanat briefly mentioned, TERI has been working in the area of sustainable development and has established itself as a leading international and national think tank. So this webinar is just one of the many activities that TERI is holding to celebrate the World Environment Day. As most of you would be aware, the Stockholm Conference of 1972 recognized the importance of addressing the various environmental issues that were affecting our existence on the planet. And that conference led the United Nations to adopt a resolution to designate 5th June as World Environment Day. So this was welcomed by all the member countries and all the organizations. And they have taken various activities to reaffirm their concern for environmental preservation and enhancement, and also to spread awareness across different sections of the society. The word environment encompasses a wide canvas. And if we have to address all aspects of the environment, we have to really give a specialized kind of a focus and attention. So the United Nations Environment Program provides a theme for addressing every year. The first such theme was given in 1974, which said only one Earth. After that, there have been many themes, and in recent years, we have had beat air pollution and beat plastic pollution. For the current year, what has been said is to celebrate biodiversity. Biodiversity is derived from two words, biology and diversity. But this diversity goes on to encapsulate a variety of life forms found on the earth in terms of plants, animals, fungi, bacteria, and many other microorganisms. And when we try to cover these, we try to recognize them through three main modes. That is, in terms of diversity, in terms of species, in terms of genetics or genetic material, and ecosystem. So these are the three main things or main categories under which the whole aspect of biodiversity gets covered. What is important is the biodiversity which has been there is under challenge. And we recognize that each of the life forms in this planet has got its own role to play, and each is connected to the other. And this connected nature is sometimes described as the web of life. So this web of life, if it has to sustain, if it has to endure, and if it has to remain for the benefit of all life forms, we have to ensure that it is well protected and nurtured and also managed in such a way that different life forms exist and they have and their role is played accordingly. We all know that in today's circumstances, the virus that is COVID-19, which has affected our working, our economy and our social interactions, all these have been affected by COVID-19. One of the theories which is gaining strong ground is that because of the loss of biodiversity, because of the loss of habitat for certain animals which were hosting this virus, the virus has jumped from animals to humans, and it is playing havoc with the health and lives of people. So the human-induced damages to nature, such as deforestation, destruction of wildlife habitation, and acceleration of climate change, have all together contributed to disturbing the balance in nature. And we need to recognize this, understand this, and then take proper measures for managing our biodiversity resources, which are very precious. Just to give an idea of the range of biodiversity that the world has, the scientists have variously estimated the numbers of these species. It is said that about 8.7 million species of plants and animals are in existence today. However, of this, only 1.2 million species have been identified and described so far. So millions of life forms are there, but we do not know, and we do not know about their description, and they remain a mystery to our understanding. Among the various steps taken by the United Nations, they have also designated the decade of 2011 to 2020 as the United Nations Decade of Biodiversity, and also as the United Nations Decade on Ecosystems Restoration. In fact, the United Nations also brought out an interim report during 2015-16, a midterm assessment of where we stand in terms of the biodiversity. And 2019, there is also a global assessment report on these two, but that is still a draft report. And according to that, about 25% of plant and animal species are threatened with extinction as a result of human activity. So because human activity has in recent decades and in the previous century, human activity has affected the habitat of various species on Earth. We have to be conscious of that, and we need to take a lot of actions to ensure that human activities do not endanger or pose a threat to life of other life forms. Now, the commonly noted pollution, climate change, and population growth, these are all increasing day by day, and we need to look at that and then take corrective measures. In fact, some scientists today estimate that half of all species on Earth will be wiped out within the next century. Just a couple of points on the Indian situation, because we have a team of distinguished panelists who will be covering a few topics. And this subject being very vast, one cannot do justice to the whole topic within 1 hour that is available to us. But just a few points I will mention by way of introduction. India is having about 8.1% of the world's biodiversity. And these are all represented through the ecosystems in mountains, forests, deserts, freshwater, marine and island groups, ecosystems. In addition to these naturally occurring ecosystems, man has also created the agricultural landscapes and urban ecosystems. So they also have different or diversified biological forms. Now, conserving the species, population, and genetic diversity in natural habitats and also in selected areas have become a major means to conserve, especially from the forest point of view. The protected areas are designated as biological biosphere reserves or wildlife sanctuaries and national parks. Some of these aspects will be covered by the speakers, by the panelists. Now, in India, two systems which are there, that is the grasslands and desert ecosystems, they are in danger. I'm particularly mentioning about grasslands because these are not looked after by any government department. The grasslands are generally owned by the community or allocated to the community, and they are now being managed by the local panchayats. So the panchayats will have to take care of these grasslands, and they occupy about 24% of country's geographical area. These are the most productive ecosystems in the subcontinent, and they're neglected. So because they provide fodder for the livestock, about 50% of the fodder requirement for the livestock, I think we need to look at this very carefully. Secondly, Sundarbans is the world's largest contiguous patch with more than 10,000 square kilometer. Is bulk of it is in India. And both in India and Bangladesh, it is estimated that about 9 million people are dependent on this ecosystem. And these mangroves are also in danger because of various reasons. One, of course, is because the carbon dioxide is getting absorbed by the sea. It is getting deposited into the sea. It is affecting the acidic levels of the water. And because they are at the junction of river and sea, the ingress of or the inflow of salt water also, or acidic water, is also impacting mangroves. And incidentally, mangroves also absorb 50 times more carbon than other ecosystems and can help combat climate change. So these two I'm just mentioning because normally when we talk of biodiversity, we are speaking of the forests, then the various endangered species and how we are going to protect them, etc. So for the benefit of students, I think they need to look at these also, which require quite a bit of study and measures to be taken. So I think at this stage I will close, and what I'll do, I will just one more point I want to mention is about the value of the biodiversity. All these life forms which are there, they're not only required for the humans' existence as of now, that is in the present day, but also for the future. And there are many direct and indirect benefits that they bring. It is said that only about 20 plant species which are under settled cultivation meet the food requirements of the most people. So one can imagine that, if some of these species get affected by any kind of pest or disease to a major extent, what will happen to the food requirement? The biodiversity also takes care of the healthcare system to a large extent, and they provide, they enhance the watershed, which holds water essential for life, then promote ecotourism and bioprospecting, and so many other things they provide. In the traditional societies, the knowledge was being passed on from one generation to the next one, and management of these resources in a sustainable form was very much practiced. But with the time, this has kind of been lost, and we have to make a conscious effort in this direction. With this, I would like to give a brief mention of our esteemed panelists who have joined here today. Firstly, Dr. Lobo, he's a marine conservation scientist and based in Goa. And he will be talking to us about the aquaculture systems and how they need to be sustained. Actually, though oceans constitute about 70% of the world's surface, they provide less than 2% of the food supply that is required. And aquaculture is emerging as one of the leading or the fastest growing food production systems in the world. And how to have this in a sustainable manner is going to talk to us on that. We also have Rita Banerjee, who is the founder director of the Green Hub project. And she is an accomplished filmmaker in the environment area and has many awards to her credit. She's involved in educating the youth by developing and communicating powerful messages through films. And she will be covering the aspects of communicating all these important messages on biodiversity management. We have Mr. Karthikeyan, who is a chief naturalist of Jungle Lodges and Resorts. And he will be speaking about the urban biodiversity. As most of you will be aware, the urban areas are set to grow at a very fast pace, and it is upsetting the balance in many ways within urban areas. So Mr. Karthikeyan has been doing pioneering work in creating awareness on the various intricacies of biodiversity and communicating them through different methodologies. We also have Mr. Siddaramappa Chalkapure. He's a member of the Indian Forest Service, and in that capacity, he has been working in 2 state governments, namely Nagaland and in Karnataka. He brings in a rich perspective on importance of forests in our biodiversity and how they're being managed to the best advantage of the people and the country. The 5th panelist is Shalita. Shalita is our colleague in Goa Center, and she has got some practical experience in the area of building up the People's Biodiversity Register under the ongoing work at the Panchayat level. She will give an idea of the work process that is involved and engaging with the community, and also give an outline of possible opportunities to interested students to join in this effort. With this, I'll hand over back to Saltanat. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir. I would quickly move. Thank you, sir. So I'd quickly like to move to the panel.
Thank you, sir. So I'd quickly like to move to the panel session. So the program has been structured where each panel will get 6 minutes, which will be followed up with a question from myself. Once we finish, then we will open it up for the Q&A. So we'll move to the first speaker, and that's Mr. Karthikeyan. So over to you, Karthik.
Thanks, Saltanat. It's a pleasure to be here and talking to students, and this is something that I love to do. And I would want to extend greetings to all of you on the World Environment Day. So without much ado, given the fact that I have only about 5 to 7 minutes, I will start off with my presentation. Saltanat, can you enable me to share the screen?
Yes.
It's been blocked by the admin.
Yes, I will. Yes, it is disabled. Can you share it now?
No, I need you to enable it for me.
Oh, okay. 1 minute. Veer, can you just check on that, please?
Saltanat, first you have to stop your share screen. Then he will be able to share his screen.
Okay. Okay. I'll just stop.
Yes. Now you can.
Okay, great. No, still the same. Nothing has changed. Okay, yeah, great. Now it's working, I guess.
Yeah, it's coming.
Yeah, great. So I will not really waste too much time on introductions and a whole lot of other things. I'll jump straight into the topic, which is urban wildlife. In fact, it's good to be talking about urban wildlife because that's a space which a lot of us spend a lot of time in. And Saltanat, can you please mute yourself?
Sorry.
Yeah. It's a place that all of us spend a lot of time in, and we also need to realize that the space is not bereft of wildlife. The cityscape that we all live in has a huge amount of wildlife that the space supports, and this is something that we need to understand and appreciate, simply because this is what is going to make life a lot more interesting for all of us. But before we move on, let me quickly ask this question as to what is wildlife. I would appreciate if all of you quickly thought about what could constitute this word wildlife, because I'm asking you this question, and also it's put in quotes simply because for most of us, the word wildlife only conjures up images of the charismatic megafauna, maybe the lion, the tiger, the leopard, the elephant, and so on and so forth. But is that so? I mean, this is something that very few of us ask ourselves. But if you really look and look up a definition for the word wildlife, you will see that any undomesticated organism can be called wildlife. And very often we again tend to miss out on plants, but then I would encourage all of us to look at plants as well as wildlife. So it's very, very important, and plants are really the foundation blocks of life on Earth, and it's important for us to pay due attention to those. And this is the kind of scenario that all of us are bombarded every time we step out of the house. And of course, all of us have been shielded from these views in the last couple of months, but then this is what we all are bombarded with anyway. But quickly moving on, Bangalore is also a place which is known for a lot of people talking there at the background. Can somebody mute all the others, please? Okay, so yeah, Bangalore is known as the Garden City, and then right to its name, we do have a huge array of flowering trees. Many of them could be exotic, but then there are quite a few which are native as well. But these are the ones which sort of beautifies the place, supports a lot of organisms, though we think otherwise. I'm not getting into the debate of exotic versus natural fauna or native fauna, but then all these definitely do help support a fair bit of wildlife in our midst. Moving on, we also have a whole array of other organisms. We could have fungi, which is something which we all turn a blind eye to. And a city like Bangalore not only has the kind of fungi that you're seeing on the screen, which is the typical fungi, but also some very interesting fungi that we do see, like the bird nest mushroom, and also the earth star. I mean, I have written about all these things on my blog. I would encourage people to go and read these things in greater detail. I won't get into details because I don't have too much time. Mosquitoes, things that bother us all the while, are wildlife as well, and perhaps constitute the food base for a lot of other smaller creatures too. We have a huge array of insects. I mean, insects, the director just now mentioned that we know about 2 million species of organisms that we have named on planet Earth, and then roughly 50% of all of them are insects, and consequently you are likely to see a lot of insects wherever you might be, even in an urban setting. You could have weevils. I'm just showing you a lot of small video clips that I have shot along the way for you to just look at these things. You could have termites. They're quite amazing, though we might look at them as pests and things like that. Termites can be extremely interesting if only you could really get down on your knees and start looking at these little creatures. Their lifestyles, the way they go about doing things can be quite fascinating indeed. Could have wasps. This whole lockdown time was really spent very productively for me because I ended up watching this mud dauber wasp going about making cell after cell, as many as 9 cells, in a bid to procreate and provide for its young ones. It was quite an amazing experience that I had watching these things and writing about what I happened to see. And quite interesting. I mean, the array of things that it could do and the efficiency and the amazing capability with which little creatures like these can do. And like you can see in the images there, they are right on my windowsill. And it is quite amazing the way these guys go about their lives. Another spider taking a huge, sorry, wasp taking away a huge, I'll replay that for you. Yeah, the wasp dragging away a huge spider, which will become a meal of its next generation. It's amazing how these guys go about doing what they do best. I'm sure all of us have seen ants, and typically for most of us, we are familiar with 2 or 3 or 4 different kinds of ants. But an urban space like Bangalore, scientists have recorded as many as 112 or 113 different species, including a new species of ant reported to science from Bangalore itself. And rightfully, it's been given the name Bangalore in its as part of its specific name. We could also have other kinds of relationships in the city. You could have ants and aphids interacting with each other. You can see aphids are essentially plant sap feeders, and the ants come and feed on the honeydew, and in return, they do provide the aphids with a lot of security. So amazing systems there. Things what we think we invented have all been done and dusted before. Pollination services is something that we ignore very often, and bees definitely can do very well with a little bit of our support. We have a whole array of other organisms, grasshoppers, praying mantids, you name it. The city is likely to be playing home to many of these things, dragonflies and damselflies. Butterflies, the little image that you see on the right hand bottom corner is the smallest Indian butterfly, the grass jewel, and you also have the southern birdwing, which is the largest Indian butterfly, and incidentally also the state butterfly of Karnataka. We have frogs and toads, about 17 or 18 species of these are recorded from the city. We have geckos right in our homes, and these guys come with the fascinating array of capabilities which you and I would just be left gaping at. Snakes, I guess these are amongst the best when it comes to rodent control, and the cities are becoming increasingly conducive and great places for rodents to live in. And I guess these are the best creatures to keep rodents under control. You have a whole array of birds, in excess of about 340 species of birds recorded from Bangalore. And that's a large number of birds. The country has about 1,300, and we have around Bangalore alone about 300 or so species. And this is likely to be true for many other cities in the country as well. We could have the only flying mammals, bats. Yes, and they are extremely important for the survival of many of our ecosystems. I don't think we can emphasize that fact more than that. They are amazing. We have other creatures which do humor us once in a while, the macaques. And the moment we talk of rodents, we think of rats, which typically are damaging to a lot of our belongings. But then these are rodents too. And these are endearing, and we do like these guys. But then there are other rodents which are also equally beautiful, cute as well. And this one happened to share my room for about a week. I'll not get into this entire story. That's a long story in itself. Thank you so much, and I would be happy to answer any questions. And you can reach me on any of these platforms. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Karthik.
I hope I finished on time.
Yes, yes, you did. You did. So I have a question for you, and
Yeah.
I'm just going to put it up. Yes. So if someone wants to become a naturalist, then what qualifications are required and what are the possible career options?
Okay, so if somebody has to become a naturalist, what are the qualifications and required, what are the possible career options? Great. So I guess the first very, very important qualification is to be curious, to be interested in nature. That's the most important thing, because this is not one of those routine things. And I guess all of us have a naturalist hidden in us. I guess we need to bring that out and nurture it over a period of time, and I'm sure all of us can become naturalists. That is at one level. But then if you're looking at academic qualifications, there aren't too many courses that are available right now, but then from Jungle Lodges, we do run a weekend program for people who are interested, 10th standard and above. Sprouts as an organization in Bombay runs similar course. And in Karnataka, the government is trying to come up with a completely formal course for people who want to pursue a career as a naturalist. And career options itself would typically lie with ecotourism destinations, or if you're really good and at what you do, you could go on to becoming a freelance naturalist, and the demand for such people who are capable of doing these things is only on the rise. So if you are really good at it, I'm sure you can eke out a career path for yourself.
Thanks a lot, Karthik. I'm sure this would be helpful for most of them.
Pleasure.
So now I would move to the next speaker, and the next speaker is basically Aaron. And Aaron's session is basically where he's going to be speaking about how the fish you eat matters to saving the ocean. So, so over to you, Aaron.
Yes, thank you, Saltanat, and yeah, very good evening to all of you students. It's really good to be here, and to be talking about the subject I'm sort of truly passionate about. Saltanat, could you please enable my screen sharing? I'm not able to share my screen as well. I think someone will have to sort of drop theirs.
No, I have stopped sharing. So
okay, let me just try again then. Yeah. Okay, sorry. Yeah, here you go. Okay, so yeah, my talk is simply called Seafood Matters. Now, as Mr. Karthik and previous to that, the director spoke, we tend to look at wildlife typically as large terrestrial mammals, birds, and a few other species that, that are typical on our textbooks. But, I hope it doesn't come as a surprise that fish are wildlife too. And this is briefly what I'm going to be speaking about. I have a background as a wildlife ecologist, but then I sort of ventured into the sea as part of my PhD, which I sort of did from Cambridge in the UK. My fieldwork was back over here, and it exposed me to a very different realm, something that you're not familiar with, when you start off your life as the traditional ecologist or the naturalist. I'm talking about like 10-20 years ago, and that's why the topic of my talk is seafood matters. Now, if we look at it, we live, over 70% of our planet's surface is the ocean. It's bright blue, and whether you come from a coastal state in Karnataka or Goa, or you're from the hinterland in Rayalaseema or Telangana, you are dependent on the ocean in some way or the other. The ocean is super important for regulating the climate. It's important because it provides us with food, like fish that we know about it. We know fish purely as food, despite it contributing hugely to the Earth's biodiversity. And when we celebrate biodiversity, we have to think of celebrating the ocean's life. We've got everything from the blue whale to the smallest plankton. And with this in mind, I'd like to sort of, take you through briefly the threats. We've got a whole range of threats that are dogging the ocean, right? From pollution, you have a lot of plastic waste. They predict by the year 2050, the oceans are going to have more plastic than they have fish, which is quite devastating if you ask me. I mean, there's a huge amount of agricultural runoff that goes into the sea. There's a lot of other, toxic blooms. There is ocean acidification, which is caused because of burning of fossil fuels, wherein the carbon dioxide dissolves with the ocean water and it causes a whole range of sort of havocing consequences in the sea. But all this kind of is missed out because most of this happens under the water, but it affects us in more ways than one. What I'm going to be talking about today is purely about one issue, that is fishing or fisheries. That brings us our fish every day, but it's also one that we have a most amount of control with, simply because it is one that we can decide, how we are to consume or how we are to sort of proceed. As I said, if you look at the ocean, it's very similar to the land in terms of the kind of species it possesses. Like the land, you have the tigers; in the ocean, you have the great sharks. I mean, you have a whole bunch of species. You have the secondary consumers like the jackals, the snakes, and the frogs in the ocean. You have similar sort of carnivores like the groupers, the snappers, which occupy a very similar position. You have the herbivores like the deer and the hare on the land. In the sea, you have the surgeon fish, you have the mackerel that feeds on phytoplankton, you have the shrimp that are the detritivores, you have the crabs that feed on other detritus. And below, you have your primary production, that is your plants. On the land, you have a whole range of species. In the ocean, you also have a whole range of species ranging from seagrass, the phytoplankton, the seaweed, and mangroves. So you have very similar structures. But one of the threats, that the ocean is faced is simply one of use, wherein we are using the ocean for our consumption. But the whole thing is about sustainability. Are we really moving in the sustainable direction is what I'm going to be dealing with. So this is a shrimp trawler. You see this along most of the Indian coastline. Anyone who lives along the Indian coastline should be familiar with this, because this is one of the big producers of seafood, but there are lots of other problems associated with it. Now, a shrimp trawler, as you can see, it's dragging its net at its back. If you look at it, shrimp trawlers, the name itself suggested that they kick-started, or they began in the 60s and the 70s, 1960 and the 70s, to target these tiny little shrimp. Now you can imagine they're dragging these long conical nets, which are very much like a sock or a windsock. And when you drag nets along the ocean floor to target tiny shrimp, you can imagine what that does. As I said, the ocean has an entire ecosystem of everything from large sharks, which are very similar to your tiger and your leopard, to very small creatures. But a trawl net is targeting shrimp, or at least it started by targeting shrimp. It catches everything that comes in its path. So this is something that we have to sort of realize. And I'm going to show you a little clip from my master's thesis when I first sort of got a glimpse of this. And this is a little clip from Goa where I was studying sea snakes, which were caught, as bycatch. They were caught incidentally. The trawlers didn't mean to catch the sea snakes, but I said when you go out to catch tiny prawns, okay, you catch everything that comes in its path. So it's not just prawns; it's other important fish. You should remember that there are only a bunch of fish that are important commercially. A lot of it is either wasted, or there are other things which I'm going to be talking about very quickly. So sorry, this is when I was doing my master's work as part of the Wildlife Institute of India, and I was studying sea snakes. The trawler would set out. As you can see, the trawler is releasing its net from the back, and the net is going to be dragged. Okay, the trawler drags its net for about 2 or 3 hours, and trawlers can be out at sea for like several days, sometimes a single day. And if you go along the east coast, Tamil Nadu, parts of Andhra Pradesh, the trawlers can go out for as many as 7 days, and they're doing this every 3 hours. So it's just dragging entire ecosystems. When you're talking about celebrating biodiversity, trawlers actually destroy a lot of biodiversity in the process. So as you can see here, it's kind of pulled up its net. Now, this video was shot as part of my master's thesis many years ago. This was nearly 2 decades ago, and a lot has changed since then, but I'm going to tell you how. So the trawlers, obviously, they brought up the catch. All the catch, including the shrimp, is concentrated at the back. When I began my work in those days, except for the shrimp, the snapper, the few important fish like, the mackerel and the sardine, a few others, the rest was just discarded. And these were sea snakes. Now, the sea snakes are highly venomous marine creatures, but they also die in shrimp trawls because they're reptiles. And like other reptiles, they need to surface to breathe. Like turtles, they need to surface to breathe. So when the trawler's net drags underwater for hours, 3 hours, they basically suffocate and they die. So trawlers were responsible for killing a large number of sea snakes. But what this did, it exposed me to the fact it's not just sea snakes, but it's countless of other species that die in a trawler net. Now, if you compare this to kind of what you would do on the land, nobody ever thinks of this because in the sea, we look at the sea purely as something that provides us with food. But imagine taking a big bulldozer to catch a few birds or a few squirrels or those few ants and bees that Karthik just showed us, and you're taking a plow and going through an entire forest. You would get everything from the tigers to the elephants to everything. Imagine that impact. And that's exactly what trawlers are doing to the sea floor every single day, except for the closed season. Now, if you look at it, most of the so-called catch of the trawler is a mixed, large number of species. When I was working along the East Coast, there were almost 512 odd species that were caught in shrimp trawlers. Most of them had little or no value. But in many cases, like along the coast of Orissa, trawlers' nets can come back like this, where the entire net is stuffed with sea turtles. This especially happens when the sea turtles are coming to breed. And now the sea turtles don't have a chance because they need to surface at regular intervals. And if they don't get to surface at regular intervals, just like the sea snakes, they die. So trawlers, gill nets, and other commercial fisheries that are responsible for getting a lot of our sea catch are basically killing, thousands of animals. So how does it kind of come back to us? How does it reflect on how we sort of move ahead? And if you look at this, in the earlier days when I started my work, they were just discarding large amounts of seafood. Things began to change. So when I began my PhD, and this was along the east coast of India in a place called Nagapattinam in Tamil Nadu, many of the students who are from Tamil Nadu will be able to relate to this. Now, this is a time when the trawlers come in and it's total mayhem because the catches are being sold, they're being auctioned. There are the auction houses over there, and you can see these trawlers have come in and they begin selling their fish. And if you look carefully, there's quite a bit that's changed. Okay, I just need to cut off the volume. Yeah, so there's a lot that's changed, but the trawlers have begin bringing all their commercial catch, the shrimp, the fish that are of commercial value, like the snappers, the grouper, the emperor, and there are many species that were not of very high commercial value, but these are very likely to be highly endangered. Many of these species are locally extinct from many parts. But can you imagine killing a couple of civet cats, say in Bangalore and a few other places? You would create a sort of a furor outside. But fish is being killed by the ton, and this is wildlife that's being killed every day. This is biodiversity. And you remember all the bycatch, all that stuff that was being cast overboard about in 2002 was now being landed. Now this is in 2008 when I began my PhD work, and I was asking the question, why were they landing this low value catch? This was an entire ocean ecosystem. Why were they landing it? Where was it going? It was all semi decomposed because they didn't even use ice to store it. What was the reason for this? And if you look at these, there's this huge drying fields wherein the villages of Tamil Nadu, Andhra, Kerala, many parts of Goa as well today, they land this and they dry it, by the ton. Where was all this going? And when I sort of trace this back, you would see that a lot of this biodiversity, a lot of this catch, a lot of these thousands of species were actually going to feed chickens. Okay. So what happened was that the trawlers were no longer sort of profitable if they had to rely on catch just for you and me because the catches were going down steadily. Just imagine doing that to your terrestrial ecosystem where you're bulldozing your way through. You would very soon be unsustainable, unproductive, and you wouldn't even be able to make a profit. Now, this does not just affect the marine biodiversity, it affects livelihoods and it affects nutrition of millions of coastal communities around the country. And this is something I would like to end with, okay, where we can then discuss solutions. I think there was a bit of confusion regarding the focus being aquaculture. It's not, but we can discuss aquaculture because that is a big solution. And with that, I would like to sort of end here. Thank you very much for listening. It was really good talking to all of you.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you very much. I mean, your session was really very good because what you did was, in a way, you sort of tried to show you tried to relate what is happening in the ocean on a terrestrial ecosystem, which is something that, we can see and we relate to. And what happens in the ocean is not. So thank you very much for that. I have a question for you, and yes, my question is related to aquaculture, which so my question to you is basically, is aquaculture, a solution for food security?
Um, Considering the current crisis, the fisheries crisis that we are in the sense that we have either fully fished most of our resources, in many parts we have overfished it so bad that many of the fishermen are kind of out of jobs or they're struggling to stay afloat. Now, that said, aquaculture can be a solution. And in fact, India, just like many other countries, following China, is expanding its aquaculture. When we talk about aquaculture, it's a farm fish production, farming of
Mm.
fish. And a
Yeah.
lot of that is happening through many parts of the country. Andhra Pradesh is actually a leader of aquaculture. Now, the thing is, the way it's being conducted may not be the most ideal. When we talk about celebrating biodiversity, currently aquaculture does not celebrate biodiversity. What's happening is they focus on, just a couple of species. They focus on things like shrimp. They focus on species like Asian sea bass, lots of freshwater gangetic carp, etc. But there's lots of other exotic and invasive species. Again, I'm not going to go into the details of it. So there are several areas where we can correct for, because what we need is to kind of support biodiversity, because that relates to biodiversity in our diets, on our food plates. You remember that plate I showed you? We need to
Yeah.
have biodiversity on our plate to stay healthy. So this is something
Right.
that's very important to understand. And aquaculture currently is not doing that. It's just doing what's kind of most marketable and the most value for money. There has to be a
Mhm.
sort of a change, a paradigm shift, and we
Right.
can go into that if there's any more further discussion. I hope I answer your question.
Yes, yes, you did. Thanks a lot, Aaron.
Yeah, thank
I'd
you.
now like to invite our next speaker. And our next speaker is basically Ms. Rita Banerjee. Rita is joining us all the way from Tezpur. So over to you, Rita. Rita, you need to
Okay, am I unmuted? Yeah, okay.
yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, okay. Sure. Okay, I'll just start. Hello, everyone, and I'm very happy to be on this platform to share my thoughts. And I think taking from what Karthik said and what Aaron said, we have to look at biodiversity in a very holistic manner. We are all in the middle of COVID-19, and I think it's very evident that we cannot go back to the same ways of being, especially with our relationship with nature and biodiversity. This is the time where we really, really need to scale up all efforts to protect nature, as well as work with conservation action. Whether it's restoration, whether it's regeneration, whether it's sustainable ways of being, and even looking at nature-linked livelihoods. So primarily my work revolves a lot around these thoughts. We run a project called Green Hub that engages youth in conservation through the use of the visual medium. We take 20 fellows every year, and especially from the Northeast region. This is all from the Northeast states, the 8 states of Northeast India. And through the use of video documentation, I think what we try is make them fall in love with all aspects of biodiversity, whether it's the birds, whether it's the insects, whether it's the forest, whether it's the river. I think when you fall in love with something, you tend to really protect it. So I think all our work is based on that philosophy. And before I go ahead, I'd like to just share a small clip which reflects what we have in terms of biodiversity. This is from the northeast of India and other parts of India as well. I don't know if you guys could hear the audio. Somebody messaged saying they couldn't hear the audio, but from my side, it's unmuted. So, Sultan, can you solve that?
When you share the screen, you need to share with the audio.
Oh, I think, okay, maybe it didn't. I'm really sorry about that, but I guess we are short of time, so I can't repeat that. But anyway, this is just a glimpse of what we have in the Northeast, and not just the Northeast, but even the rest of India. And all this is being documented by youth from this region, from indigenous tribes, youth who belong to forest patrolling staff, youth from urban centers, as well as remote rural areas. So at this point, the question is, why are we working with youth? And why are we working with biodiversity? So the thing is, India has the largest population of youth. I mean, 65% of our population is below the age of 35. So the voices of the youth really matter. So if you look at the last 2 months in this lockdown period, despite the lockdown, it's been a collective voice of youth across the Northeast and different parts of India that is emerging as a shield for many of our protected areas. Hashtag Dibang, not a damn country. Hashtag I'm Dehing Patkai. Hashtag My Molem. I think these are not just social media handles, but are becoming the source of information, getting collective together and amplifying voice to protect what we have. Almost 19 student organizations got together in solidarity to protect nature, to protect biodiversity. So a lot of what happens in our country when we're talking about or when we're celebrating biodiversity, our natural spaces, or we are talking about sustainable living, or we are talking about human rights, I think depends on the way the youth take it forward. The fact is COVID-19 has shown, I think that the time is now. I mean, we keep hearing that, we have to save everything for our children, for our future. But the fact is, I don't think we have that luxury anymore. Whatever we do now has to be for now. We have to save it for the present. And I think that's something which I think we all need to think about. So before I end, I think I'll just share a very small clip. I'll check if the audio is working this time. I saw it on social media. It was written by a 12-year-old or a 14-year-old Idu Mishmi girl from the Dibang Valley. And it was also edited by a boy belonging to the Idu Mishmi tribe. And it just captures the spirit of the people and their link with their own forests and their own rivers. And I think we need to really understand that if we want to move ahead and we move ahead beyond COVID, I think we really need to rethink about how we want to go ahead. So I'll just play the clip now.
ये हवा ये फिजाएं ये नदी और पहाड़े हैं पंछियों की गुनगुनाइयां से हमको है प्यार कोई इनको क्यों बदलाने की चाहतों पे है जुटे हम बसे हैं इन बहारों में कोई उनको भी बताओ
So I think I'll just like to end with this clip. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Rita. I have a question for you, and I'm just going to quickly put that out. So my question to you is, can you see the question?
Let me see.
Yeah.
Role of.
So how practical it is how practical it is to actually involve the youth in conservation activities. So you've spoken about how, you know, you have your network with the youth. So I mean, what are the issues with it?
So I think it's not a thing about practicality. I think it's something which is very crucial now, because I think environment cannot be seen now as a the way we look at it as an outside thing. Environment is us. So I think whether it's the children in schools, whether it's our education system, we need to break out of silos. And the youth need to think of environment more as an umbrella to whatever we are doing. You know, so whether it's researchers working together, whether it's writers, whether it's musicians, whether it's journalists, I think it's looking at an environment holistically. And whatever we do, we need to be very conscious about the way we are moving ahead. And I think there's a lot of options now for the youth to really get information. There's so much of information available on the net. There are a lot of organizations working with environment, but it's not just environment. So it's very important to look out for what is around you. What are the issues around you? What are the forests around you? What are the biodiversity around you? Like Aaron said, the biodiversity of our marine life, about our beaches. You know, we have immense biodiversity in this country. So it is about engaging with that deeply, and that needs to seep into all levels of what we do, whether it's school, whether it's colleges, whether the work which we are doing.
Thanks. Thanks a lot, Rita. So now I would request the next speaker, and the next speaker is Shalita, and she will be basically speaking about the People's Biodiversity Register and how people can participate in this. So over to you, Shalita. I am stopping screen share so you can start.
Connection has been a bit unstable, so I thought I had lost.
No. We can see you and
Evening.
hear you.
I've already shared the screen, so I assume you can see the presentation. And since we're running a bit late, I think I will just go through the overview of the People's Biodiversity Register and how the youth can help us in the preparation of it. So since we know the youngsters are our next generation and we are trying to conserve the resources for them, so it's only natural that we try and involve them. And since it is World Environment Day, I think everybody has already explained what is biodiversity. This is the formal explanation, the legal implications through the Biodiversity Act. It has been defined. So the Act was enacted as a result of the Convention of Biological Diversity. And through that, all these bodies had to come into being. Okay,
Shalita,
so,
did you share your screen, the presentation? We couldn't see that. So.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. So, is it okay now?
Yes, now it's fine.
Yeah. So right from the national level, we have the National Biodiversity Authority, and we have the state biodiversity boards, and then we have a biodiversity management committee in each village of each state. Okay, so at this level, what we do is at the village level, we have meetings and we have awareness activities with the schools of the village so that the students can come on board. And this is what the PBR contains. Basically, it's a document which will contain all the biodiversity knowledge of that particular village. and it is developed by the people. So along with the people, not just the adults, but we try to also involve the students. These are the steps, and the most important step is the awareness in the schools and colleges, at which point the students come on board. So once we have the interested students who are volunteering, we have a small workshop for them. And in this workshop, we just explain how they can best click a picture of whatever they have around their homes, whether it is plants or insects, things like that, which they can just click on the phone and they can share with us through the WhatsApp group. So we collect additional data from them, not that we are using only the students to collect the data. So for example, we have school students, we have college students, and then we've also had a small trip, exposure trip for them. And these are the groups of the students who had helped. So we have their names as well added to the register. These are all the things that are included in the PBR. So the agrobiodiversity, for example, you would have the crops, the people that are involved from that village. So that would be the peoplescape, the landscape, the waterscape. Then there's the pests of the crops, the soil type, the weeds. If it's a fruit plantation, again, you would have animal pests maybe. Also the markets through which the people would sell the produce, the fodder for the animals, which would also come from the crops. In this case, it is rice. So these are things that students see on a day-to-day basis around them if they live in villages, or even if they live in cities. They would have, for example, even in their garden, they would have some fruit trees, some flowering plants, they would have some medicinal plants maybe. Or if it is a kind of village which has a cultured fishery, maybe they would have some ponds around in the village that they could go and click photos or find out what fish is cultured there. Domestic animals, again, for milk, a lot of villages have. And they would have markets where they know what local fish is being sold. Wild biodiversity, for example, when we've had a group of students in one of the villages, they would go out on a Sunday in a small group, just friends together, and they would click the wild berries, flowers that come up. Seasonal biodiversity examples. Also, we have got nice diversity of monsoon plants, mushrooms, things like that. And there is the aquatic biodiversity. There will be flowers like this, which are lotus, which are used for worship. And it is a resource for the people of that village, maybe not of all villages. Again, there are mangroves in some of the small island villages that we have in Goa. That also has ecosystem services. There is fish that is breeding in the mangroves. So again, that comes under the coastal and marine flora and fauna together. So these are all formats, which in total are around 32. And there's sheet 1 and sheet 2, and there's the written part of it where we compile all the data, and then there is the photographs. So we do end up compiling a huge amount of data, and sometimes it is supplemented by things that we cannot capture. For example, things that may be in gardens, we cannot personally go to everybody's garden and try and click things, or there are moths that will be there only in the night in the houses. So this is where students can help out in clicking. Birds and animals sometimes is just opportunistic. There may be a day when we could go with our cameras and there may be no migratory birds on that day, and by chance maybe a student will click it and then send us the picture. So these are small examples in which students can help. And also, if they are in the city, there are always parks and gardens where things are available. If you are there by chance and if you have a phone with you, it's easy just to get a click of it and then share it on the WhatsApp group. And then we identify it. So for example, these are all the ornamental plant pictures that are sent by WhatsApp, and I've tried and put them together. And these many pictures, we cannot just put it like this. So there is a format to be filled. So here you can see that we have the technical part of it. There'll be the scientific names and whatever other information that is required to be filled in. And then the names of the students who have contributed also will be included. It will be on record that you have helped in the PBR of your village. And then the photos are just put in a simpler way here, of course, labeled with the scientific names. And that is how, this is just one example, but in every group and every format, there may be some information that a student has helped us to put together. Right, so since this was not shown in the beginning, this is how it is. This is the final report, and this is where we have included a picture of this little girl, and she's compiled some kind of a diagrammatic version of biodiversity in her village. So I hope I haven't overstepped my time. Thank you.
No, thanks a lot, Shalita. My question to you very quickly is that if people want to participate in preparing the People's Biodiversity Register, so if students want to participate in it, how can they go about with it?
First of all, if they already have a biodiversity management committee for their village or their city, and the college is willing to participate. So usually we approach through the biodiversity management committees through the chairperson, or we can write a letter to the college or the school directly. And then once the authorities are willing to participate, only then we don't directly go to the students. But when we have ward-wise meetings, also if the ward members know some students who may be interested in biodiversity, then they bring them along to the meeting and then we include them in the group. So basically the way we have worked with villages at present, we have a WhatsApp group for every village we are working with. And it includes all the interested members, including students.
But if there are students in other parts of the country who want to prepare it or want to be involved in it.
So this is, the PBR is mandatory for every state of the country. So eventually it will be done. And when it is being done for their part of the state or village, then those students can participate.
Okay, fine. Thanks.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Shalita. We move into our next speaker. If you can stop sharing your screen, Shalita. So the next speaker is basically Mr.
Hello.
Hello, we can hear you.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
And the screen is displayed over there?
No, you will need to share your screen.
Yeah, please, if you can do that. And
no, you'll have to share it from your system.
Yeah, I had shared, I think.
No, it's not.
No, it's not there. You have to share it. Click on the share screen icon and then choose the desktop.
Yeah, is it shared now?
No, yes, it's coming.
No?
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Change it to full screen.
A very good evening to all of you. Having heard a lot about biodiversity and the different forms in which it exists, hope I am audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, you are.
Yeah. It's turn we deliberate about conservation, and very ironically, when it comes to the conservation of biodiversity, we speak about forests, or so to say, is the forest are the forests all that important for conservation of biodiversity? That's the paradox I'm trying to speak about. We have learned that biodiversity is everywhere, all around us, but the onus is on forest. Why so? Probably this picture could explain us. Like we understand there are three different forms of biodiversity: genetic diversity, species diversity, and ecosystem diversity. And when we refer to forest often, it's the ecosystem diversity that we would be speaking about. Forest as an ecosystem has got, it's an macro habitat or macro ecosystem, but then it also has got a lot of smaller micro ecosystems, like say a river ecosystem, pond ecosystem. A herb in itself would be an ecosystem. Tree, we have got different animals, and all that the panelists have been speaking about till now probably is there in forest. That's the reason we look up to the forest when we want to conserve biodiversity. And then matter of the fact, when we speak about forest biodiversity or forest, since it's at the level of the ecosystem diversity, by according conservation to the forest, we are automatically conserving species and genetic diversity. You can see it over here because ecosystem diversity encompasses both genetic as well as species diversity. And then if you can glance to what the FAO website states about the forest, it says forests are home to the most territorial biodiversity, and it goes on to say that it supplies water, provides livelihood. It's the basis for sustenance of life on the earth. And then we know for sure that we are deriving a whole lot of ecosystem services, right from spiritual things to the economic or the trade kind of thing that we often enter using the forest produce. And then speaking about the kind of extent of forest we have across the globe, it's roughly around 31% that exists right now. And speaking about the forest cover in India, it's around 24 to 25%, including the tree cover that we see in across the roads, along the roads, and then in cities like major cities where we have got good green cover. Otherwise, as a forest, around 20% forest are there in India. But what I want all the viewers here is to concentrate on this projection. We have got forest map of India superimposed with the mineral resource map of India. So to say that the development that happens in terms of mining and related activities is mostly happening where forests are there, and that's how a potential threat to the forest. And few more projections about the forest. Forests in India are source of energy. They are source of food, fiber, fodder. Around 5 million cattle that are in India graze in this forest, many of forest fringe areas. We have got over 2 lakh villages situated in forest or along the fringes of the forest. So lot of pressure is there, and then forests are able to soak up so much pressure, and still we are managing to conserve this vast about 80 million hectares of forest in the country. But this being the property of the government, of the department, unfortunately no one else wants to own up for it, and then this tragedy of commons is what we are witnessing. With regard to conserving the forests in India, we need to understand that forests are administered locally at state levels, and even in government at the center. So it's a concurrent subject. Both state as well as government of India can legislate about it. And then we have got various acts, rules, guidelines that we look up to while conserving the forest. And then we have got a lot of policies for promotion of agroforestry, in addition to conservation of the government forest, for which we are heavily dependent on the various legislations which I have mentioned here. We have got policies and programs of the government in terms of promoting agroforestry, rural forest-based economy, agro-based industries. And then government also has a policy for addressing issues like man-animal conflicts, and then supporting people living around the forest areas. And then government also frames some specific issue-based programs or plans. For example, beginning of the century, there was issue of tiger conservation. For that, NTCA has been constituted, which is having a clear mandate and pure mandate for looking into conservation of tigers. Similarly, we have got Project Elephants, since mangroves are an important issue, important kind of ecosystem. We have got special programs for conservation of mangrove, so on and so forth. If we have to speak very specifically as to how and what governments are doing for conservation of forests, I would all of you to have a deep insight into the kind of model that is working in Karnataka. Karnataka probably is one of the leading states with regard to conservation of forests and wildlife. We are the state where we have shown the maximum increase in forest cover in past 2 years. That is in between 2017 and 19, the maximum increase in forest cover. And then we are the state leading in, one of the leading state in number of tigers, number of leopards, elephants, and then lion-tailed macaques. We are also addressing the role and then responsibility of the forest range villagers. We are having schemes like Karnataka Aranya Protsaha Yojana, and then a lot of kind of compensation that we give to the farmers. And then we are utilizing our forest resources for various other forest dependent activities like ecotourism, general tourism, and all. So Karnataka model of administering forests is one ideal way that we can look into deeper, look into in an extended manner to understand as to how we are endeavoring to conserve our forests. And from far northeast, I got an example, and wonderful example of conservation of Amur falcons, wherein without having to refer to any of the legislations and not much from help from the government of India, state government of Nagaland along with communities has been able to reproduce wonderful results in matter of a season to accord highest level of conservation to an critically endangered species in terms of what happened in previous year. So that is what I'm trying to speak about Amur falcon conservation. Rita knows about it, and many of the viewers here, participants here would have heard about it. One important thing about this conservation in Nagaland was its true convergence model, wherein probably 7-8 organizations at state level, and then 7-8 organizations at government of India, and even international organizations like BirdLife Hungary and Hungarian Natural History Museum, Bombay Natural History Society, Wildlife Institute of India, partnered with the Department of Forest in Nagaland, and then made it a success story. Otherwise, there are various other approaches for conservation of biodiversity. Identifying hotspots and then addressing them is one thing. We have got traditional, modern methods that viewers would like to understand in detail. As and when time permits, people can go through these ex situ, in situ conservation models. And then since we have been asked to suggest any reading material if at all available, there are a lot of international level conventions that government of India is part to it, and then we as a part of this as signatory to these conventions, we are bound to conserve various other kind of species or biodiversity. Like I was telling, a whole lot of things on the cupboard, but main thing is what crux is what happens on ground as to how we are able to manage the biodiversity and forest on ground. That's where these models of Karnataka and Amur falcon conservation model in Nagaland that I am trying to suggest come handy. Otherwise, this is the projection that I am making try here is what happening. And then when we are more research oriented and probably have to wait for this kind of things to happen. I hope viewers are able to see the screen and read the things.
Yes, we are able to see it.
Or if you are too akin to scientific things and then try to recreate the ecosystems, probably you will be a bit late. That we are understanding, of course, for past few months already. This is a situation we are arrived at where we have reached a dead end, or probably we can't. Thing is, people think that planting a tree or resorting to creating some plantations would give a lot of ready-made solutions to a lot of footprints that we are trying to create. And then at the end of the day, when we, at a larger forum, when we try to speak about biodiversity, conservation of forests and all, people think we are outdated and then we are not keen to development, and then we are just caring about a section of the aspect of society that we are raising in the tone of activists and all. But bottom line is we have to conserve. There is no other way. And for those who want to read much about kind of forest we have got globally as well as in India, these are two reports that actually come out very periodically and then give realistic pictures. And then if you want to, if you're not very keen on reading, this is an movie that you would like to, most of you would have seen this. I would like to go back and see it once again. Probably this is James Cameron's effort of having this picture movie is probably one of the greatest awareness program that has been created. People refer to it as a sci-fi. Hardly anything there is in fiction. Scientific, of course it is, but it's not fictitious. We see the tree of soul here. We have got mother trees. We recognize mother trees in all of our forests, especially in Northeast. We identify them and then we accord the highest kind of conservation protection, this one to that. And then we see this very interesting creatures over which the protagonist would be flying in this Avatar movie. Same thing happens in probably various parts of the country when our mahouts drive elephants. That's how they build a bond with the elephants, and then they manage to bring them under control. So the point I would like to make is not much of what has been projected in this movie is not a fiction. Probably everything is very realistic. If the things that have been deliberated here today are not very convincing, I would like all of you to read about the Gaia theory put forth by James Lovelock, British ecologist. He says by 2040, the population of the planet would be around 1 billion. From what it is 7 billion today, it would be just 1 billion by 2040. Many people argued with me whenever I projected this in my presentations, but very same people call me and say that the Lovelock clock has started ticking. That's probably true. So we have been paying for water and many other resources. It's time, I used to project that it's time we pay for air, but we are already paying for it. This is the situation right now. So the bottom line, again, coming back to it, we need to conserve our forests. Otherwise, if we still think we are the smartest species amongst all biodiverse species on the earth, here is a projection, my final projection here, the cute and cuddly factor. The projection over here says the smarter the animal, the mammal, the species is, it's more subject to be threatened. So probably we believe that human being is the smartest over here and we are threatened the most as on date. So thank you for giving me this opportunity. Any comment or question, I would be free to.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, sir. Can you stop sharing your screen so that I can put up the question so that the students can view the question as well?
Okay.
So, fine. So, so basically my question to you, 1 minute, I'll just put up the screen.
Right.
Yeah. So, so my question to you is that, how effective is the involvement of communities in reducing the human-wildlife conflict? So, in light of what has been happening in the recent times, so, you know, in the whole human-wildlife conflict, so how effective is the involvement
of communities at the outset, I would say yes, but it's far easier said than it is happening in the field, because it's kind of a double-edged sword. past couple of months, of course, we have seen that the lesser we get into wild, the lesser we interfere with the wildlife, it's better. It's better for rejuvenation of our forest, wildlife, and biodiversity, that is there. But often people restrict only to a half of this issue. Whenever we speak about human-wildlife conflict, we only tend to speak about human. Who is there to speak about wildlife? That is what I ask people always. Who are here to speak for the wildlife? Who is there to speak for the elephant that suffered during past week in Kerala? What is happening to a whole lot of species that are being hunted and killed? When loss is happening to the crop and there is loss to human life, we approach the authorities and we get compensation and all. But what is the scenario when wildlife is at loss? That's a question to be addressed at last. But otherwise, I have already suggested by quoting the example of Nagaland that effective involvement of communities will definitely help positively in conservation of wildlife and biodiversity. But we need to be cautious as to what extent we can involve public.
Yeah, thank you very much. I would like to quickly wind up because we've really extended the time. So this program has been basically, with an effort to reach out to the youth to appraise, inspire, and enable them to participate in biodiversity conservation through either taking photographs, through film documentation, preparation of people's biodiversity register, being mindful of their consumption and food patterns, being sensitive and looking out for biodiversity in every space that is available, in formulating and expressing opinion that is grounded in science and knowledge to bring about a positive change. So we would sincerely hope that we've been able to make a dent in this direction. So do keep in touch through your various platforms. This webinar is part of the youth engagement under the World Sustainable Development Summit. We just launched the first virtual dialogue of the World Sustainable Development Summit 2021 on the eve of World Environment Day, that is yesterday at 4:30 p.m. So you would see a lot of activities which is lined up for the youth. So please do join us in that. Before we sign out, we would like to thank all the speakers who have put in a lot of effort for today's session. You may feel that, it was a short session, but in that short span of time, there was a lot of information that had to be put in together. So thank you very much. A big round of applause to all the speakers who have been extremely committed and have been available at this point of time despite other things coming up in their schedule. We would like to thank our directors, Ms. Annapurna Vancheshwaran, the regional director, Mr. Narasimha Raju, and Ms. Livleen Khalon for their support and guidance for executing this webinar. A special shout out for Livleen for believing in this program and facilitating with its execution. All of you who have participated in today's program must have seen the program banner or poster through which was circulated. So this was prepared by Mr. Isaac Stewart from St. Claret College, and he's a student who had participated in one of our previous programs and has continued to be in touch with us, and and he had sort of, I can help you out, ma'am, with whatever you need. So thank you very much, Isaac, for your help. We would also like to thank the IT group of Terry, Delhi and Bangalore for providing and facilitating today's webinar. In particular, we would like to thank Mr. Jagdish, Mr. Arun, Ms. Aarti for sending out the bulk mails, Mr. Kuldeep for setting up the email ID, Mr. Veer Bahadur Singh for all the executing support. So thank you very much. And from the Bangalore office, I'd like to thank Sarvana and Puneet. I would also like to thank my team, the core team comprising Shabana and Taru, and my extended team both in Bangalore and Delhi for their support towards the program. We sincerely apologize for the technical glitches, especially with regard to the YouTube link. I think a lot of you could not join on it because I think it got disabled. And then by the time the next one came, I think it was a little too late. We shall share the link to all the participants who have registered with us. So we have the email ID, so we shall share these details with you. And keep a watch out with us for all the various programs that we have. So thank you very much, and do keep in touch and be safe. Thank you.